Good evening. Welcome to Drugs, Crimes, and Politics, brought to you by the Drug Policy Forum of Texas and the Harris County Criminal Lawyers, Defense Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Buford Terrell, professor at law at South Texas College of Law. Our guest tonight is Mr. Bill Pelke with Amnesty International. Before we turn to him, though, there are a couple of recent developments that I would like to bring to your attention. The first is that this week the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in the Oregon right to die case or assisted suicide case. The Oregon state law, based upon popular referendum, allows doctors under very, very strenuous limitations to write prescriptions and instructions for lethal doses of medication so that terminally ill patients, if they so desire, may use those to handle their own death. And we will discuss this more fully in a few minutes. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, this is Dean Becker calling in. How you doing today, Buford?
Pretty good. How are you, Dean? Do you have some news for us from the world of drugs?
I do indeed. A couple of things I wanted to point out. First off, for my Drug Truth Network, this marks our 4th anniversary that we've been on the air. We began on KPFT radio back as a segment on Ray Hill's show 4 years ago, and I want to thank folks for tuning in and being in support of our efforts. It's been quite an ordeal, if you will, at times, but we're lucky to have a great list of guests who joined up with us and who are willing to speak about the subject of drug reform, about this prison industrial complex in America.
And in that 4 years, you've become pretty widely spread. How many stations are carrying you now?
We just picked up another one this week. It makes number 44, and I don't have the station call letters with me, but it's in Alamosa, Colorado.
Okay.
And we're trying to get on Air America, but I guess what I really want to point out is that we are making progress. It's slow, it's glacially slow, but day after day we do make progress. I understand that there was a congressman who asked Mr. Murray, the I think assistant deputy or something for the ONDCP, to step down, and he's not going to do it. From what I understand, he's one of the main protagonists, prevaricators in my mind, that keep this drug war going, and he's going to stick with his guns. This week, our guest on Cultural Baggage is going to be Paul Wright. He's the editor of Prison Legal News, and we talk about the prevalence of rape, male-on-male rape in particular, that goes on within our prisons. And then on the Century of Lies show, we will have Jason Zeidenberg. He's the executive director of the Justice Policy Institute. And he's a little bit more conservative, I suppose, than I. He isn't quite sure what to do about these drugs, but he's certain that what we're doing isn't working. And I just want to kind of send out an appeal to folks out there that I just started up a new website. It's endprohibition.org. And on that site, there's links to what I consider the lucky 13 or the prominent 13 within drug reform, ways that you can get in touch with your representatives, ways that you can contact your legislators, help in writing letters to the editor, and so forth. But the end of this drug war is really up to the listener and the viewer to decide for themselves how much is enough drug war for you, and when you want to help end it, you will bring it just that much sooner by your efforts. And again, I urge folks to visit that new website, which is endprohibition.org. My shows air 6 days a week on KPFT, the 420 Drug War News, every afternoon at 4:20 p.m. and some mornings at 4:20 a.m. as well. And then we also now have on Fridays the Cultural Baggage Show, which airs at 7 p.m., and the new show, Century of Lies, which airs at 2 p.m. here in Houston. And Buford, I want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to your viewers. I think it's necessary that they get themselves to work, because everywhere I go, people tell me, Dean, you're doing great work, I appreciate it, et cetera, et cetera. I cannot find anyone in America to argue this point with me any longer. But what they often tell me is that they haven't written that simple letter, 50 words, to their congressman. They haven't taken the time to alert those in power that they think a change is necessary. And it is necessary that they take that time and they make that contact for these politicians to finally be able to say their hands are untied and to begin making these necessary changes.
Well, Dean, what I always tell them is that it's important for them and nice for them to contact me or you, that we always like to hear from them. But that important phone call or letter, or especially personal visit, should be going to their elected representatives, because ultimately it's the voters that control the politicians, and it's the voters that the elected representatives listen to. So I'm backing you up at least 100% there.
And I agree. Buford, our goal, if I may postulate, is that we want to just educate these people, embolden them enough to go ahead and make that step.
Or make them mad enough.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what are the call letters and frequencies?
It is in Houston, KPFT, and it's 90.1 FM in Houston, and it's 89.5 on the dial in Galveston.
Okay, and endprohibition.org is your new website.
Yes, sir. I urge folks to please visit.
Okay. Thank you, Dean. It's always good to hear from you.
Yes, thank you. Goodbye.
We were beginning to discuss the fact that the court heard arguments on the Oregon statute this week. Supposedly the questioning was quite lively. There's not much way to get indications of how the law will turn out. In some ways, it's a very unprecedented attempt on the part of the federal government to step in and usurp the state's traditional goal in defining what the scope of medical practice is. So we'll be looking to see how this case comes out. Procedurally, it's a little bit unusual in that Justice O'Connor did not take part in the arguments today, leaving an 8-member court. However, assuming that a new justice is confirmed within the next few months, if it looks like the 8-member court would be dividing 4-4, it's quite possible the court could order a re-argument so that there would be 9 justices deciding. So procedurally, this one could be a little bit different. The other new thing I wanted to bring up was a quiet story from the inside pages of the Houston Chronicle about a week and a half after Hurricane Katrina. As I'm sure most of you know, Houston has been serving as host for well over 100,000 evacuees from that storm, and large numbers of those have been in, or were at the time, in large public shelters like the Astrodome. According to the Chronicle, of those evacuees in public shelters, some 30 to 50% of them had some sort of substance dependency problem. Now, as best I could make out, of course, most of those were alcohol dependencies, as one would expect. All of these people received some sort of medical attention. Those who were dependent on alcohol or substances like Xanax, in which there's a real danger of serious health improvement or even death through withdrawal, were given that medical assistance and the drugs necessary for withdrawal. But the irrational nature of the drug program really showed up in our treatment of those that are dependent on opioids. Those who were dependent on heroin or things like Vicodin, were simply allowed to go through withdrawal and were given supportive treatment for the symptoms of the withdrawal. So basically they were kept at the Astrodome with nurses watching them while they went through withdrawal. However, those that were fortunate enough to have switched to the legal opioid of methadone before they came here were put in vans and driven to local methadone clinics to receive their daily doses. We might want to ask ourselves why those dependent on one opioid get maintenance doses while those dependent on other opioids simply are left to suffer through withdrawal. So that's just a couple of things that have happened recently. So now I'd like to introduce our guest and find out what's happening in the world of Amnesty International these days. Welcome.
Well, thank you. I represent a lot of organizations, Amnesty International, which I've been state death penalty coordinator for Amnesty in the state of Indiana for about 7 years. I'm also the chairman of the board of the National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, a major organization in this country that fights the death penalty. Where I spend most of my time is with the organization called Journey of Hope, From Violence to Healing. And that's an organization that's led by murder victim family members doing traveling speaking tours, sharing their experiences of how violence came into their lives, how a family member was killed, and how we don't want the revenge of taking another person and taking that person's life. We say that execution is not the solution.
Well, if you're opposed to capital punishment, I'm sure being in the state of Texas keeps you busy.
Well, I live in Alaska, but I travel around the country, and we're having our major event this year in Texas. So from October 14th through October 30th, we have a group of about 80 people who are going to be traveling around the state, starting off here in Houston. We're going to be going to Huntsville, having a rally at Death Row where they execute people in Huntsville. We've got people going to be going down Corpus Christi, Brownsville, coming back up, in San Antonio. We've got people going out to El Paso, Amarillo, Lubbock. We're going to have about 4 days in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, about 3 days in San Antonio. We're going to have 5 days in the Austin area, speaking in high schools and colleges and churches, and just sharing our personal stories and talking about how the death penalty just causes more suffering and pain.
Hey, what kind of reception do you expect at these meetings?
Well, what we do is we tell our personal stories and we talk from the heart. And I used to support the death penalty. And so I talk about how that I did support the death penalty. And it wasn't until one of the girls that killed my grandmother, a 15-year-old girl named Paula Cooper, was sentenced to die in electric chair by the state of Indiana, and how I originally supported that decision. But how about a year and a half after my grandmother's death, about 3.5 months after this girl's on death row, where I became convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that my grandmother would have been appalled by the fact that this 15-year-old girl was on death row waiting for the state to execute her. I felt my grandmother would have had compassion for this girl and for this girl's family. I felt my grandmother wanted someone in my family to have that same sort of love and compassion. I didn't have any because my grandmother had been very brutal and hugely murdered. I was so convinced that's what my grandmother would have wanted. And I felt she wanted someone in my family to have that same sort of love and compassion. I begged God in a short prayer to give me love and compassion for Paula Cooper and her family, and to do that on behalf of my grandmother. And that prayer was answered. And I did have compassion. And when my heart was touched with that compassion, it brought forgiveness. And that forgiveness brought healing. And that's what murder victim family members need after a loved one has been killed, is they need that healing. If you don't have that healing, all you have is that pain, and that pain turns to anger, and you want revenge, and you want the person who caused that terrible pain to be out of the picture. And you think if that person is executed, then that pain's going to go away. But it doesn't work that way.
Well, I've been surprised over the years at the number of people in your situation that I've heard speak up, members of victims' families saying, we don't think executing this person would do any good. And I guess kind of the flip side of the same coin are members of victims' families that after execution say, it really didn't do us any good either. It's not something you can say. These people say in every case, but it surprised me that there have been as many of them as there have been that have been willing to speak out on it.
And in a place like Texas, it's tough to speak out because there is the killer mentality. I always heard, real cowboys don't kill women, but Texas just executed another woman here just about a month ago. I was here when they executed Carla Faye Tucker back in 1998. I mean, this was a person that should not have been executed. This was a person who had gone through a rehabilitation. Her life was transformed. She became a wonderful human being. She was able to help people not only in the prison. She was able to help guards, the warden, people outside the prison, and people around the world. And there was no need to have killed her. I mean, there's no need to really kill anybody.
Well, the more recent execution of a woman, though, actually raises the real question of the possibility of executing an innocent person.
Right, Frances Newton. The possibility she may have been innocent. I've met Frances's mother. What we put that woman through is cruel and unusual punishment. There's supposed to be a law against that in this country. I witnessed an execution here in Texas back in August. A friend of mine, James Aldrich, was put to death. His two brothers witnessed that execution. They also witnessed the execution one of James's brother back in 1995. So that family has gone through two executions. That mother's had to have two sons executed. The fathers had to have two sons executed. That is cruel and unusual punishment. And James's family suffered just as much as his victim's family suffered. It just doesn't make sense, and we don't need to do that. We have life without the possibility of parole here in the state of Texas. If a person commits a terrible crime, they can be kept in prison for the rest of their life, where they'll never hurt anybody else, but we don't have to kill them. And it's cheaper to keep a person in prison for a lifetime than it is to execute.
Well, I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is how much it costs the state to prosecute a capital case and then to carry through of all of the post-conviction appeals and procedures, and that it does, in fact, cost more to execute a person than it does to imprison them for life.
Yeah, Amnesty International, I believe the average figure is about $2.5 million per case to see a person go through the death penalty, through the trial, through the sentencing, through the period of time, through the appeals, to the final execution. And a person can be kept in prison for a lifetime for about $800,000. So it's actually, it costs about 3 times more to execute somebody than it does to keep them alive.
Well, I believe there was one county in Alabama or Georgia 4 or 5 years ago in which the district attorney simply refused to prosecute a capital case on the grounds that the county couldn't afford it and it would bankrupt the county to have to put on that trial. So in a sense, the severity of the thing actually hampers enforcement itself.
Yeah, I mean, the death penalty is really, and who gets a death penalty is like a crapshoot. You could throw, 100 cards on the table and try to sort them out and see who gets a death penalty and who doesn't. And it's equally terrible crimes don't get the death penalty. Yeah. But often it's a matter of finances. If it's a poor county, they can't afford it, that person will get prison. If it's a politician that wants to get a notch in his belt, say, I'm tough on crime, we're going to kill people, but the people you find on death row are poor people, minorities, basically the weak. They go after the weak people. If you have the money of an O.J. Simpson, you're probably not even going to be found guilty, let alone sentenced to death.
Well, we just had capital sentence set aside in Texas this week when the court agreed that the defendant was mentally retarded such that he didn't meet the standards. And looking back over the past few years, it's kind of amazing the number of cases in which mental capacity has been raised as a serious issue. I mean, it's not exactly like the state's picking on the genius class here.
Well, I met Johnny Pinner before when I was visiting on death row, and he's a man, he's a child in a man's body. Right. I mean, he really, he doesn't, it's not all there. A good friend of mine, his mom and dad, I called Lois Robinson for years. I've called her mom. Her son Larry was a paranoid schizophrenic, got involved in a terrible case of murder. But the man should have been put in hospital and helped that way, and maybe stayed in for the rest of his life. But he was mentally ill. He thought he was doing God a favor and doing everybody a favor by killing these 4 people. God told him to do it. I mean, this is how sick the man was. And yet then instead of, and they tried to get help from the state of Texas, by the way, for this guy, for Larry. And the state of Texas said, well, we can keep him for 30 days, but he doesn't want to stay. He's 21 years old. If he doesn't want to stay, we can't keep him. But if he ever, and he's never done anything violent, if he ever does something violent, then we can give him the long-term care that he needs.
Right.
But one day he went out and killed 4 people, and so the long-term care was where we're going to execute you.
Wow.
And so Lois had to have her son was executed. I call Lois Mom. To this day, I call her Mom.
Yeah.
It was a terrible thing to put the Robinson family through, and there was no need for it.
Many say that the biggest unit of the Texas mental health program is the state prison system. That seems to be the way we treat people with mental problems, is throw them in prison.
Is that the best that our society can do, is to take the sickest of our society and to execute them? I mean, is that the best we can do?
I recall a case here a few years back. In fact, it may have been Penry at one of his earlier execution dates, in which on the day of execution they actually served the last meal. He got through, they asked him if he wanted chocolate ice cream for dessert. Here we are within an hour or so of actually going to the gurney, and he says, no, I'll save it for later. I mean, this really shows the mental capacity to understand what's going on.
And there was also a case like that in Arkansas, where he said, I'll eat it after the execution. I mean, he didn't understand what was happening to him.
And overall, have you seen any change in popular attitudes toward the death penalty over the past several years?
Well, we did a Journey of Hope here in Texas back in 1998, and it was a very tough thing to do. That was 7 years ago. It was tough organizing.
Yeah.
It was a lot of tough venues. It was hard to get venues. The attitude in Texas has changed so much in the last 7 years, and we've had overwhelming support for the Journey coming this year. Venues opening up for us to speak at. Today, just before I came here, we were at a protest. And many of the cars came by, were honking their horns, they were waving at us. They knew very much what we were all about. 7 years ago, we didn't get that. Things are changing. I think people in Texas are starting to get sick of the death penalty. Texas has a reputation throughout the world of being a killing state. Huntsville, you go to Europe, everybody has heard of Huntsville, Texas. They know that Texas has executed over a third of the people in this country that have been executed. I think people are getting sick of it.
Yeah. I was looking not too long ago at the figures on the number of people on death row across the country, and it looked like, just with rough numbers, that Texas had about half of those. And Harris County has at least a plurality, if not a majority, of those in Texas.
Well, when you talk about the death penalty belt, Harris County is the buckle.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely the pinnacle of this mountain. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that, of course, that's complicated it here has been the situation with the Houston Police Crime Lab, and I want to get into that a little bit later, probably after we take our break. Has there been any movement legally in any of the death penalty states to reduce their death penalty or do away with it statutorily?
Well, just this year, the United States Supreme Court made a decision about juveniles on death row.
Right.
And that's something I've campaigned many years for. And I think 77 people committed crimes before the age of 18 were taken off of death row, and most of those were from the state of Texas, the largest majority. Yeah. There's also been some favorable rulings about mentally retarded. Right. We're working now on a mental illness issue as another step. And states like New York, who's one of the last states to bring in the death penalty back in 1995. Right. There was one, and it was a very popular thing to do. The governor that beat Mario Cuomo, Pateki, says, I'm going to bring the death penalty back, and he brought the death penalty back. They sentenced 6 people to death. Nobody was executed. Yeah. And then a judge found something wrong with their law, and so they thought, well, we'll just do a little simple fix. And all of a sudden, people are saying, hey, we now have life without the possibility of parole. We've spent millions and millions of dollars on the death penalty process. We haven't executed anybody. I think it was like $240 million they had spent on the process. Hadn't executed anybody. Several of the cases had been overturned, and they decided that they were not going to reintroduce the death penalty in the state of New York, so New York doesn't have a death penalty right now. The worldwide trend is to get rid of the death penalty. Right. And the trend here in this country has been less and less executions each year, except for the state of Texas.
Right.
And they can't kill them fast enough here.
However, the last legislative session did allow for life without parole.
And do you know how hard that was fought for so many years to keep life without parole?
Several sessions of the legislature passed.
Because some of the people knew that if life without the possibility of parole was passed, then not so many people would get the death penalty. And that's why it was resisted.
Oh, I know it's been finally passed over the resistance of the state prosecutors, but
because they want to put that fear into you, that this person can get out in 40 years and go kill somebody else. Well, now that fear is gone. Life without parole means exactly what it says. That person will be in prison, can never harm anybody else, and so juries are starting to say, hey, well, maybe we don't need to kill him.
But I think it's probably a little too soon yet to see what effect that new option is going to have in the state of Texas, at least.
Well, I lived in Indiana when they went to life without parole, and it made a big effect on the amount of death sentences were given in Indiana.
Yeah.
So I think it'll probably be the same way here.
So, well, we'll see, especially since the Texas prison system, as usual, is bursting at the seams and having trouble with capacity and trying to find ways to move people out.
Well, that's big business here in Texas.
Yeah, too big. 2 years ago, which are the last figures I remember, our annual prison budget was something like $2.6 billion. And even for a big state like this is a lot of money to spend just on prisons.
Well, they could spend a little bit more of that money on education because Texas ranks pretty low on education.
Right. And it's been fairly well established that education is one of the best preventions of imprisonment there is. So we'll see what happens in the future. We're about ready to take a short break and we'll let the people at home get a little information about something else, and we'll be back after a 1-minute break to continue this discussion. So let's see what we have to say today.
President Bill Clinton signs into law the Omnibus Consolidated Appropriations Act for 1997. Fiscal year 1997 totals provide increased drug-related funding for the two leading drug law enforcement agencies in the Department of Justice. October 2nd, 1992. 31 people from various law enforcement agencies stormed Donald Scott's 200-acre ranch in Malibu, California, looking for marijuana plants. Scott, who believes thieves are breaking into his home, comes out of the bedroom with a gun. He is shot dead. Scott had refused earlier to negotiate a sale of his property to the government. After extensive searches, no marijuana is found. October 3rd, 1996. U.S. Public Law 104-237, known as the Comprehensive Methamphetamine Control Act of 1996, is signed into law by President Bill Clinton. October 4th, 1970, legendary singer Janis Joplin is found dead at Hollywood's Landmark Hotel, a victim of what is concluded to be an accidental heroin overdose. October 5th, 1999, the war on drugs is an absolute failure, says Governor Gary Johnson of New Mexico. Johnson also meets with founding members of Students for Sensible Drug Policy. October 6, 2000, former U.S. President Bill Clinton is quoted in Rolling Stone, "I think that most small amounts of marijuana have been decriminalized in some places and should be." This is Steve Nolan for the Drug Truth Network. Normal's fall benefit will be
back. There were a couple of other things that I wanted to ask about. And the first one, to take someone who's been in the news lately. We've got the BTK killer in Kansas City, who I think most of us would agree is some kind of a monster. This is the kind of case where a lot of people think the earth might be better off without this guy around. Is there a place for the death penalty in these kinds of special extreme cases?
I don't think there's a call for the death penalty in any case. Society is now safe because he has been arrested and he's put in prison. I believe, John Wayne Gacy I was from that area. I was there when John Wayne Gacy was executed. I said, don't kill John Wayne Gacy. A sick man to have done the things that he did.
Yes, he was.
But society was safe when John Wayne Gacy was arrested and taken off the streets. They weren't any safer the day that when he was executed. We don't need to kill these people. They're sick. Definitely sick. But we don't need to kill them. Because when the state kills, they kill in your name and they kill in my name. And I don't want anybody killed in my name. It's not necessary. I was in Vietnam. I was in the infantry. Your job was to kill, if that's what you had to do. But once you captured that man, the war was over for this person. He was your prisoner. You don't no longer kill him. And once that man's been arrested, society is safe. And that's what we need to be. We need to be safe. We've got to get these people who commit these terrible crimes and get them off the street and keep the John Wayne Gacy's and the BK killers, keep them off the street forever. But we don't have to kill them.
Well, a lot of people I have heard argue for some sort of retribution or evening the scales, that it's more than simply quarantining the bad guys to keep us safe, that there actually is a human need for retribution that comes into play here.
Well, retribution, that's another word for revenge.
Yeah.
And the reason we have the death penalty in this country is because of Christians. If this Christian support for the death penalty is why the death penalty is allowed to exist today. I know I came out of that group. I went to an independent Baptist Bible college. They preached the death penalty. The Christian philosophy is love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness. Where are any of those attributes taking place when you execute somebody? They're not there. And it's purely a matter of revenge. Yeah. And in the Christian faith especially, revenge is never ever the answer. Revenge belongs to God, not the man. And if somebody says they want revenge, that's unchristian. And yet it's the Christians who say we want the retribution. That doesn't make a bit of sense to me.
Well, I'll admit that it's always confused me to hear people say that they believe strongly in the right to life, to be totally opposed to abortion because they say it's a killing, yet these very same people are among the strongest supporters of the death penalty.
Absolutely.
It just seems like a contradiction.
Sure. And they say, well, the unborn is the innocent, and then you got this guilty so-and-so over here. According to the Christian philosophies, you're supposed to, it's easy to love the innocent. When you're being a real Christian is when you can love the bad guy. But if you really love that bad guy, you're not going to want to execute him. You're not going to kill him. It's a contradictory philosophy.
Yeah. Well, another issue that's come up recently is historically, if we look, one of the motifs in the death penalty in this country has been to find a more humane way to kill people. We move from hanging by strangulation to hanging by neck breaking, from hanging to the electric chair, and lately we had the movement that swept the country pretty quickly, a lethal injection. And now we've got people saying that the lethal injection is inhumane, but let's take a phone call first.
Sure.
Hello, caller, you're on the air.
Yes, hello. I was just watching the show. What is this show about, anyway?
Well, tonight we're primarily talking about capital punishment in the United States.
But what is the show? What is the show normally about?
Oh, the title of the show is Drugs, Crimes, and Politics.
Oh, okay.
And normally our emphasis is on drug laws, but we expand our scope and talk about general problems in the criminal justice system in this country as well.
Well, in that case, wondering if you could comment just briefly, and I'll hang up and listen to the response.
Okay.
On the Nathan Williams case from a few years ago.
Okay, I believe our guest knows what you're referring to, so I'll let him talk.
Yeah, I know about Nathan Williams. I know the name. I'm not really familiar with the case or what that's all about.
Yeah.
So I can't really address that too well.
The name doesn't even ring a bell with me. So
okay. I know when you drive out to Livingston, where the death row prisoners are housed, somebody there in their yard has a big banner saying "Free Nathan Williams," that they believe he's innocent.
Yeah.
I really don't know enough about the case to comment on it.
But before we got the call, and if the caller wants to come back and fill us in on the details, we'll try to do a little better. But I was about to ask, we have a call again. So, hello, hello, caller. You're in the air.
How y'all doing tonight?
Just fine. How are you?
I'm looking at the show, listening to the conversation, and I would like to know, being the topic is drugs, where and how do you think crack cocaine entered the United States? Because it just didn't, somebody in the backwoods just didn't say, well, I'm going to make crack cocaine and spread it from neighborhood to neighborhood. I've heard different stories, you know, and it's been a while back, but in the 80s it was on the scene, hit the scene kind of hard, and people were dying from it, but they never really said how it originated. I want to know, what do you think and your opinion on it? And I'm going to listen to your answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll take a minute or two to digress here on this. I think what the caller is referring to is that there's been a myth around that the CIA invented crack and introduced it into East Los Angeles to kill off the black people. There doesn't seem to be any real evidence to support that theory. The San Jose Mercury News in California a few years back ran an extremely detailed series of stories detailing the growth and spread of crack cocaine in the United States, and its first center point probably was East Los Angeles. Now, up until that time, a lot of the more well-to-do cocaine users had been freebasing or reducing the cocaine hydrochloride, which most people used, down to pure cocaine base. This involved the use of ether. This was what Richard Pryor was using, among others. We do know that in the South American production companies, some of the production workers in the cocaine factories had already figured out that by mixing a base like baking powder, or baking soda, with the cocaine base, they could in effect get free cocaine, although mixed up with the adulterants that make the rocks. And this knowledge seemed to come north with the shipments from Colombia. The particular thing about crack is that while powder cocaine normally sold at least in quarter-gram units with a minimum of about $20, because of the baking soda and other things, crack could be handled and sold in quantities so that a rock might go for $3 or so. So it became, in effect, the ghetto drug, the drug for people who couldn't afford the other stuff. We went through some hysteria about how bad it was. We've since figured out cocaine is cocaine. But I think that what you were referring to, and which has been pretty well rebutted, was the myth that the CIA invented it and purposely dropped it into the black community. I don't think there's any substantial basis for that. No one seems to be taking that story seriously anymore. Okay. But anyway, I know there are several suits that are now pending claiming that the particular chemical mixture used in death by injection is inhumane, that it has the potential of introducing great pain for a substantial period of time while it's going on. What are your views about this idea of a humane execution as opposed to chopping someone's head off as the French did until recently?
You know, the bottom line is it's all killing, and I don't think there's a humane way to kill. I remember I had surgery a few years ago, and I was put out as basically the same way that they do a person.
Right.
And I came to, and I became aware of what was going on, and I was having trouble breathing. And I tried to call the attention to the doctors and nurses because I hear them talking, but I couldn't talk. I couldn't even blink an eye. I couldn't.
Right.
All I could do was wiggle my right foot a little bit. And I'm trying to wiggle my right foot to get their attention because it really hurt.
Right.
And finally, one of them says, "Oh, look, his foot's wiggling. It must be some sort of reaction to the drug." And so for about a minute and a half, I really had a difficult time breathing. And finally, I went back to sleep again. And when I woke up, the surgery was over with. But there is a period of time that person is paralyzed. It looks like he's gone to sleep there peaceably. And yet, what takes place in his body over the next 7 minutes, his lungs are crushing. It might look humane. I mean, a lot of times, I've heard victim family members say after an execution, "Well, we're glad it's finally over. We waited years and years for this to happen. We're glad it's finally over." But he died too easily. He didn't suffer like, I want to see him kick. I want to see him scream. And so they're not even happy of the way that the person died, but he's still just as dead. And he may have suffered, but you just didn't see it. And so that's what some of these lawsuits are about.
Yeah, as I understand the process, the first drug that's used in the injection is basically a barbiturate type drug that should make the person unconscious. A general anesthetic put them to sleep. The second drug is a curare-like substance that paralyzes all of their muscles. They can't move, they can't make noise, as you were discussing. And then the third drug, the one that actually kills them, is a potassium drug that stops the heart from beating. And the knowledge is that this particular drug, when injected, causes excruciating pain. They say it's like being injected with fire. So the problem is that if the first drug, the anesthesia, wears off a little bit so that the patient feels the third drug, but the second one keeps him from moving or screaming or demonstrating it in any way, that he is in this excruciating pain until he finally dies.
And part of the lawsuits is there's some of these drugs that are used are not even allowed to be used to put animals to sleep anymore.
Yes.
And yet they're still using them to put humans to sleep. That's pretty amazing to me.
Yeah, and that there never was any real testing or medical discussion. It's just this was the kit the first people put together, and everyone else has been
But it comes down to the bottom line, whether they quarter somebody, whether they put them in an electric chair, or whether they give them lethal injection. It's murder. It's a human taking another human being's life. And to me, it's just absolutely unnecessary.
Well, I think there were also, over the recent years, several cases in Florida of botched executions with their electric chair.
Right. One of the people who's been involved with our Journey of Hope, Sonny Jacobs, her and her husband were sentenced to death. Sonny, it took 18 years to prove their innocence, but Sonny was on death row for 5 years. She went to life in prison. After 18 years, they were proved her innocence. She was out. Her husband was also innocent. His was a botched execution. The foam in the headset was not right, and flames were leaping out. They had to put the switch in 3 times. They had flames leaping out several feet. I think Pedro Medina was another person in Florida. They burned these people alive. One of the things about the states that have gotten rid of the electric chair, people are really gun-ho for the executions, and they like the electric chair, and they say, "Fry, sucker, fry," and burn, burn, burn. And now that that's not around anymore, a lot of, you don't hear so much anymore. It's taking the thrill out of the death penalty for some of these people.
Well, I remember, at least at the time of one of these executions in Florida, a member of the state legislature that was supposed to be looking at it said, "Let's leave it this way. Maybe it'll scare more people out of doing these things."
That's right. That's absolutely correct.
Well,
teach them not to do anything bad in Florida.
Yeah. Does the death penalty have a deterrent effect?
It's never, no credible study has ever shown that the death penalty is any sort of a deterrent. People either think they're not going to get caught, they're mentally incapable. Where I used to live in Indiana, we could execute 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds. In Illinois, you had to be 18. You go up a few miles north, and in Michigan, there was no death penalty at all. The person doesn't say, "Well, gee, I'm 17 years old, so I'm going to go out to Illinois and I'm going to kill somebody in Indiana so I don't get the death penalty." Or, "Well, I'm 21 years old, I'll go to Michigan because I won't get the death penalty there." The kind of mind that's going to go out and kill somebody doesn't think logically and rationally like that. They don't even think they're going to get caught. It's no deterrent. absolutely no deterrent. It's only a deterrent when a person is executed. That person will never kill again. But, we're a society. We can send a man to the moon. If we can send a man to the moon, and we can take a person who's committed a terrible crime and put him and lock him up where he can never hurt anybody again.
No. Except for the really strange cases like Gacy or BTK are professional assassins, and there are a few of these. Most killers don't really repeat anyway, do they?
No, the murder, the recidivism rate for those sort of crimes is very, very low. I mean, and totally different than, say, your sexual crimes, and that recidivism rate is very high. But the normal murder that most of these people on death row for, the recidivism rate is very low.
Well, back to something else that we brought up a few minutes ago, and I mentioned the problems we've been having here in Houston with our crime lab. Primarily started out looking at DNA cases, and since has involved seriology, ballistics, just merely keeping up with the evidence. I mean, they found 200 and some odd cartons of evidence that had basically been lost and weren't available. And we've seen these same kind of crime lab botches all across the country. The FBI, it happened to them twice. And with things like Project Innocence, where they've gone through and found people that were actually innocent, got their convictions reversed. Things like the governor of Illinois commuting every sentence because he said the process was just so botched we can't guarantee any of them is right. How many of the people on death row really did it?
Well, almost 120 people now that have been sentenced to die for the crime of murder have been able to prove their innocence before the execution took place. We don't know how many people weren't able to prove it.
And that's proving actual factual innocence, not pointing out that there was a technical slip-up in their trial or something.
And there's only one out of every 8 cases is there any DNA evidence available. Now, a lot of cases today are getting DNA people out. The DNA evidence is getting them out. But what about the cases where there is no DNA evidence? You don't think we make mistakes on them cases too?
Yeah.
Well, we surely do. Randall Dale Adams has been a friend of mine for many, many years. He was on death row here in Texas. Amnesty International sponsored him when he got out to do a speaking tour. But there was a video that was done called Thin Blue Line. And it proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that Randall was innocent.
That was
a
case coming out of Dallas, wasn't it?
Right, out of Dallas. But I have spoken with Randall on many occasions, and Randall has made the statement. He said, folks, if you believe in the death penalty, make no mistake about it, sooner or later you're going to execute an innocent person. Make no mistake about it. And we do. Now, some people say, well, gee, if we execute 1 or 2 innocent people out of 100, well, that's just kind of too bad. That's the price we got to pay to have something that we need. Well, it's not really something that we need, and 1 or 2 out of 100 really is too many, especially if it's a child of yours. And it happens.
One thing I've mentioned is that when we look at manufacturers who are making something like toasters, many of them subscribe to something called the Six Sigma standard. That means they expect their products to come out correctly 99.9999% of the time. Now, my contention is that if we expect our toaster production to be that good, that we should be able to insist that our criminal justice system dealing with people's lives do even better than that. And 2 out of 100 is a long way from better than that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, 1 innocent person being executed is one way too many.
Yeah. And I have not talked to or read anything from anyone not a professional member of the prosecutory custodial plan who has not said that innocent people have been executed. I mean, it's such an obvious thing. The patterns of mistakes in criminal trials, the patterns of cover-ups by prosecutors are such that it's just inevitable that innocent people have been executed.
Well, of course, that doesn't matter to the United States Supreme Court. The case here in Texas with Herrera
Right.
said that innocence is irrelevant.
Yeah.
As long as he had a fair trial, that's all we're worried about. Whether he's innocent or not, that's beside the point.
That's like the old joke from the old Western movie is, first we'll give you a fair trial, then we'll hang you.
Give him a fair trial and hang him.
But part of it is, there's an awful lot of pressure on police and prosecutors both to close cases.
Sure.
And there was a notorious district attorney in Dallas who, he was the DA at the time. John Kennedy was killed in Dallas, DA there for well over 20 years. His training comment to his assistant DAs was, just remember this, we convict them on page 1, the courts turn them loose on page 23. And that's a pretty cynical attitude, but it seems to be pretty widespread, too.
Well, you mentioned about the pressure to solve cases. And, of course, a prosecuting attorney wants to be able to make his record look good, especially, if he's going to run for office again.
And DAs are elected all across the country.
But of the 120 people released off of death row, it's an amazing number of people because of prosecutorial misconduct.
Yeah.
And the withholding of information. To me, that's attempted murder. We've got one of the people who's going to be with us on this journey, Juan Melendez. Prosecutorial misconduct. The prosecuting attorney knew he was innocent.
Yeah.
In fact, had a tape recording of the real killer that he got 30 days before he took Juan Melendez to trial. To me, that's attempted murder. He tried to kill Juan Melendez.
Yeah. Barry Sheen and Peter Newhouse's book a few years back, Actual Innocence,
Right.
which I still think is required reading for any U.S. citizen, summarized in those cases in which they had shown actual innocence, summarized what had led to the wrongful conviction.
I think it was very Scheck.
And, Scheck, probably the most universal error was eyewitness identification, which anyone who's looked at the process will tell you is absolutely no damn good. Botched physical evidence, but in almost every case, the secondary factor that made it possible for these things to work was some sort of condemnation or cover-up or active participation by the prosecutor and the police. I mean,
Yeah, it absolutely happens. I mean, there's good prosecutors out there.
Yeah.
But there's some people that just want to solve cases, and they don't care if they get the right person or not. As long as they solve that case and it looks good on their record, and it makes the rest of the prosecuting attorneys look bad.
Yeah, and it's a common statement about police procedure is that they may start out looking for what really happened, but that once they have identified a probable suspect, it's just like they have put the blinders on, and it's now, how do I build a case against him? And they shove aside anything that doesn't contribute to the case they're building.
Well, you've heard about the arrest for DWB.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that happens. You got Clarence Brantley here in Texas. I mean, they were going to get a black janitor, and didn't even. And it was a white janitor that was guilty, but they wanted the black man.
Oh, we have an Hispanic federal judge here in Texas, down in the Rio Grande Valley area, who has said publicly that he has been stopped on the road at least twice while driving while brown. So, yeah, there's some biases. Before we run out on time, you want to repeat for us your planned project and tour around Texas?
Right. We've got a group of about 80 people coming in from around the country, led by murder victim family members, sharing their stories. People, husbands whose wives were killed, husbands whose wives, children, mothers whose sons, daughters were killed, sharing their stories, talking about how the death penalty is a matter of revenge, and they don't want revenge, and to say that taking of another life is going to be a just compensation for the death of their innocent loved one is actually an insult. To say, well, everything's okay now because we killed this bad guy. But we're going to be in the Houston area October 14th to the 18th. If you go on the Journey of Hope website, www.journeyofhope.org, and click
Journey
on
of Hope as
Journey
one
of
word.
Hope,
Yeah.
all one word. And if you click on there, it'll take you to the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty site, which gives a schedule of all the events that are going to happen here in Texas, here in Houston. So if people are interested in getting involved in any of those events, there's going to be a major event at St. Mary's on Sunday night, the 16th. Bud Welsh, whose daughter was killed in the Oklahoma City bombing, will be speaking. Susha Graham, who was exonerated, sentenced to death for a crime he didn't commit. Sister Helen Prejean is going to be with us here, and we're going to be just traveling throughout the state, and speaking probably in about 150, 175.
These are all open to the public?
Oh yeah, well, except for some high schools, but there's churches and.
We're glad you could be with us tonight. It's been kind of an eye-opening discussion. I hope it's made some people think about what's going on. And as I said earlier in the evening when talking about Dean, the important thing, whether it's about the death penalty or about the drug laws, is for you to communicate with your elected representatives if you don't like the way things are now. They're the ones that can change. They will only change if you make them do it. So whoever your representatives are, write them, or even better, visit them in person and let them know how you feel. It's been good being with you tonight. We will be back with a new show in 2 weeks, and we will continue looking at the effect of the drug laws and other related issues on our American society. We thank you and good night.
Normal's Fall Benefit will be on October 9th at the Last Concert Cafe. As we get ready for the next legislative session, we need to educate our representatives on the benefits of marijuana and the insanity of our current policy. It will start at 4:20 p.m. and include speakers from local reform organizations, along with some great music from Psychodello, Stony Hayes and MC, David Fallen Folk, and Arizona Tom Loud. Last Concert Cafe is located at 1403 Nance Street. And don't forget, bring a friend.
Policy of drug prohibition is hopeless. It is hopeless. It will never get better. Literally, victory today is being defined as slowing down the pace of defeat. We ought to listen to science and medicine when it comes to whether